Drive down Queen Alexandria Lane yesterday, and I mean, if you drove down there, you would never be able to tell that a mother, her toddler, and another woman were shot and killed there Saturday night. I mean, there was no crime scene tape anywhere, and it just seemed like everyone was going about their normal day. And here at JPD, they tell us that they're still searching for a suspect. They also tell us that the victims were 30 and 26 years old, and the toddler was just 2 years old. A red Mitsubishi missing from the victim's home was found yesterday at Manhattan Park, but police say it was empty.
Whoever did this is an absolute coward and is probably the most vilest of human beings. You kill a toddler.
It was a Saturday night in Jackson, Mississippi, the kind of evening that feels entirely ordinary, familiar, and above all, safe. Families were finishing up their dinners, winding down their weekends, and settling in for the night. In residential neighborhoods like this, the loudest sound you expect to hear on a Saturday evening is the hum of an air conditioning unit, or maybe the faint sound of a television drifting through an open window. But on the 300 block of Queen Alexandria Lane, the fragile peace of that Saturday night was about to be shattered in the most unimaginable way. Inside one brightly lit, unassuming home, a family was ending their day. A 25-year-old mother, her 30-year-old sister, and a precious 2-year-old boy tucked safely into his bed. By 9:15 p.m., the lights in the house were still on, but the home itself had gone dead silent. All three of them had been executed. This isn't just a story about a localized crime. It is a story about a tight-knit community ripped apart. A veteran police force pushed to its emotional breaking point, and a desperate investigation that started on a dark Mississippi highway and spiraled into a multi-state manhunt. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are looking into the tragic, baffling, and infuriating case of the Weathersby family, a case that proves that sometimes the most profound evil doesn't break down the door in the dead of night. Sometimes, it just walks right in. To truly understand the shockwave this crime sent through the city of Jackson, you first have to understand the setting. Queen Alexandria Lane is the kind of street where people know their neighbors. It's deeply woven into the fabric of the local community. It's a place where kids ride bikes on the sidewalks and neighbors wave to each other from their front porches. If you were to drive down that street the morning after the tragedy, you would have found it eerily normal. There were no flashing sirens lighting up the daytime sky, no chaotic crowds. The crime scene tape had already been pulled down. The neighborhood seemed to be going about its typical Sunday routine. It was a surreal, almost sickening juxtaposition, the absolute mundanity of a Sunday morning completely masking the horrific bloodshed that had occurred just hours prior. But beneath that surface-level calm, the community was vibrating with absolute terror. When local news reporters canvassed the area, knocking on doors and asking for witness accounts, a chilling pattern emerged. Most residents flat out refused to appear on camera. They wouldn't show their faces. They wouldn't give their names. They were terrified. The violence that is so often seen on the evening news had landed directly on their doorsteps, and they were afraid that the killers were still watching. A few brave neighbors did speak under the strict condition of anonymity, and they revealed a detail that makes this story even more tragic. When the fatal shots rang out that night, nobody called 911 immediately. Why? Because they thought it was just fireworks. In a quiet, peaceful neighborhood, the sharp, rapid cracks of gunfire were so entirely out of place that the human brain tried to rationalize them. Neighbors heard the pops and assumed it was something celebratory, something harmless. After all, shootings like this simply did not happen in their part of town. They were terribly, tragically wrong. By the time anyone realized that the sounds echoing down Queen Alexandria Lane were the sounds of a family being wiped out, it was already too late. Just after 9:15 p.m., the first patrol cars arrived at the residence. When police officers approach a scene with reports of multiple gunshots, they are trained to look for specific visual cues. They brace themselves. They look for shattered glass. They look for a kicked-in front door or signs of a frantic struggle that might have spilled out onto the front lawn. They prepare for a robbery gone wrong or a domestic dispute that boiled over into a chaotic physical altercation. But as the first responders approached the Weathersby home, they found none of that. The exterior of the house was perfectly intact. The entryways showed no obvious signs of forced entry. The windows were unbroken. What they found inside, however, was a scene of calculated, deliberate violence. This was not a random burglary. This was a targeted execution. Inside the home, officers discovered the bodies of 3 individuals. They found 30-year-old Erica Weathersby. They found her 25-year-old sister, Kiana Weathersby. And then, in the most heartbreaking, soul-crushing discovery of all, they found Kiana's son, 2-year-old Kamari Given. He was shot inside his own bedroom. All 3 victims had sustained multiple gunshot wounds. The killers had not hesitated. They had not spared the 2 young women, and they had looked down at a toddler, a baby who had barely begun to experience life, a boy who should have been dreaming about his toys, and they pulled the trigger anyway. For seasoned law enforcement officers, death is unfortunately a familiar part of the job. They learn to compartmentalize. They build a wall between their emotions and their work. But there are some scenes that shatter that armor. Walking into a room and finding a murdered toddler is a trauma that stays with an officer forever. It is the kind of scene that makes veteran cops go completely quiet. In a matter of minutes, the house on Queen Alexandria Lane went from a warm family home to a house of horrors. As crime scene technicians flooded the house, dusting for prints, collecting ballistic evidence, and taking photographs, lead investigators began piecing together a timeline. How did the killers get in? Because there was no forced entry, police had to consider a terrifying possibility. The victims might have known their killers. They might have opened the door for them, inviting their own executioners inside. And how did they leave? A critical piece of evidence emerged very early on in the investigation. The family's car, a red Mitsubishi, was missing from the driveway. Had the killers used it as a getaway vehicle? Was this a carjacking that somehow escalated into a triple homicide? The very next day, authorities received a massive break. The red Mitsubishi was located at Manhattan Park, a public recreational area situated away from the crime scene. But when police approached the vehicle with weapons drawn, they found it completely empty. There were no suspects sleeping inside, no weapons stashed in the trunk, just an abandoned car, left sitting in a public park. Forensic teams descended on the Mitsubishi, tearing it apart looking for DNA, stray hairs, fingerprints, and trace evidence. The discovery of the car indicated that whoever committed this atrocity wanted to put distance between themselves and the house as quickly as possible, eventually dumping the vehicle to cover their tracks. By Sunday afternoon, news of the triple homicide had saturated the local media. The citizens of Jackson were not just saddened, they were outraged. How does a child get executed in the one place he is supposed to be the safest? The Jackson Police Department felt the crushing weight of the city's anger. When Police Chief Rael Brackney stepped in front of the microphones, the atmosphere in the press room was suffocatingly heavy. Usually, in these press conferences, law enforcement officials stick strictly to the script. They use sterile legal language. They talk about ongoing investigations and persons of interest. Chief Brackney didn't do that. She threw the bureaucratic playbook out the window. Her face tight with raw emotion, she spoke directly to the killers. She called the crime horrifying and vile. And then, in a moment of unfiltered disgust, she laid it out plainly. Whoever did this is an absolute coward and is probably the most vile of human beings. You kill a toddler. It takes a coward to slaughter a toddler. That word, coward, struck a massive chord with the public. It stripped away any twisted sense of power or intimidation the killers might have felt. It reduced them to what they truly were. Weak, pathetic individuals who resorted to murdering a baby. Behind the scenes, detectives were working at a fever pitch. They were pulling surveillance footage from nearby businesses, analyzing cell phone tower pings, and tracking the movements of the red Mitsubishi before it was dumped at the park. The pressure was immense. A killer willing to murder a 2-year-old boy was a profound threat to public safety. They needed to be taken off the streets immediately. And then, a breakthrough. Acting on a web of confidential intelligence and digital tracking, law enforcement tracked their suspects to a Mississippi highway. In a high-stakes, highly coordinated traffic stop, police swarmed a vehicle and apprehended 2 men. The arrests were swift. The news broke, and the public breathed a collective sigh of relief. The narrative seemed to be wrapping up neatly. A horrific crime, a fast-paced investigation by dedicated detectives, and the bad guys put in handcuffs. Everyone thought that was the end of it. The police had their men. The community could finally start to grieve and heal. They were wrong. In the complex world of criminal investigations, an arrest is rarely the finish line. It is often just the beginning of a much deeper dive into a criminal network. As detectives interrogated the 2 men pulled from the highway, and as forensic evidence continued to pour in from the crime lab, a much darker, much more complex picture began to take shape. This was not the work of just 2 rogue individuals acting on impulse. Exactly 5 days after the initial highway arrests, the Jackson Police Department dropped a bombshell that left the city reeling all over again. The number of people charged with the brutal murders of Kiana, Erica, and little Kamari didn't just increase, it doubled. 2 more individuals were identified, tracked down, and taken into custody. But these weren't local arrests. The net had been cast wide, pulling in suspects from across state lines. 4 people. 4 individuals allegedly involved in ending the lives of a young mother, her sister, and a baby boy. The logistics of a multi-state investigation and the involvement of 4 distinct individuals suggests a chilling level of planning and premeditation. This wasn't a mistake. This was an orchestrated hit. With 4 suspects sitting behind bars, you would think there would be a profound sense of closure for the city of Jackson. But in many ways, the arrests only amplified the agony of the unknown. We know the who. We know the when and the where. But the most haunting question remains largely shrouded in mystery. Why? Why did 4 people orchestrate a brutal attack on a quiet residential street? What could a 25-year-old mother and her sister have possibly done to warrant such an overwhelming, violently disproportionate response? And even if there was a dispute, even if there was a deeply rooted conflict between the adults, how does a human being justify turning a weapon on a sleeping toddler? The police have wisely kept their cards close to their chest regarding the specific motive, preserving the integrity of the prosecution so that these individuals can face justice in a court of law. But for the public, the lack of a clear why makes the tragedy infinitely harder to process. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that sometimes evil doesn't have a rational explanation. Sometimes it is simply a total and complete void of human empathy. The neighbors on Queen Alexandria Lane are left to grapple with the memories of that night. They are left wishing they had realized the popping sounds weren't fireworks. They are left advocating for a world where disputes are settled with words, not with gunfire that tears families apart. As the legal process grinds forward, with court dates, arraignments, and eventual trials, it is absolutely vital that we don't let the spectacle of the criminal justice system overshadow the real focus of this story. This case is not just about 4 suspects in orange jumpsuits. It is about Kiana Weathersby, who was just 25, stepping into the prime of her adult life. It is about Erica Weathersby, 30 years old, a beloved sister, and above all, it is about Kamari Given, a 2-year-old boy whose life was stolen before he ever had the chance to truly live it. Before his first day of school, before he could learn to ride a bike, before he could grow up to be whatever he wanted to be. We consume true crime to seek justice. We watch these videos to understand the darker aspects of human nature. But we must also watch to remember the victims, to ensure that their names are spoken, and that the gravity of their loss is never, ever minimized. The silence on Queen Alexandria Lane that Saturday night was deafening, but the voices demanding justice for Kiana, Erica, and Kamari will continue to ring out, clear and uncompromising. What are your thoughts on this case? How does a community bounce back when something this dark happens right on their doorstep? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you appreciate deep dives into the cases that demand to be remembered, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. We have to keep shining a light on these tragedies. Until next time, stay safe, look out for one another, and hold your loved ones a little closer tonight.